Welcome to Grimdark Tactics, the channel where we dive deep into the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. I'm your host, and today we're beginning something special, a journey into the most pivotal moment in galactic history, the moment that would tear apart the Imperium and plunge humanity into 10,000 years of endless war. Today we explore the opening book of the Horus Heresy, and I need to warn you right now, everything you think you know about heroes and villains is about to change, because this isn't just a story about good versus evil. This is a story about how the greatest among us can fall the furthest. Our tale begins with words that should chill every servant of the Emperor to their very core. Words spoken by Captain Gavriel Loken of the Luna Wolves. I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor. Think about that for a moment. The War Master, the Emperor's most beloved son, the architect of the Great Crusade, a murderer. But how did we get there? How did the golden age of expansion become the nightmare we know as the Horus Heresy? The answer lies in a discovery that should have been a triumph, but became the first crack in the foundation of everything. Picture this. The 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, led by none other than Horus Lupercal himself, drops out of the warp expecting another routine compliance action. Instead, they find something that shouldn't exist. A lost human empire. A world calling itself Terra. And ruling over this world, an emperor who has never heard of the Imperium of Man. Now, most commanders would see this as a simple case of mistaken identity. Send down some diplomats, clear up the confusion, welcome another world into the Imperium's embrace. But Horus isn't most commanders. He sees the bigger picture. He understands that two emperors cannot coexist, that this discovery threatens the very legitimacy of everything they've built. So Horus does what Horus does best. He tries diplomacy first, not because he's weak, but because he's smart. He knows that the only humane war is a swift war, and the swiftest victory is the one that never requires battle. He sends his most trusted advisor, Haster Suganis, to establish contact. Suganis was everything a Luna Wolf should be. Charismatic, intelligent, diplomatic, the kind of man who could talk a tech priest into abandoning the Omnissiah. He was also Horus's closest friend and advisor, a member of that inner circle known as the Marnival. But this Terra isn't like other worlds. Their emperor isn't some petty tyrant drunk on local power. He's old, tired, but proud. And when Suganis, in his attempt to explain the Imperium's rightful claim, accidentally implies that this emperor is somehow lesser, illegitimate, the old man's pride flares like a dying star. Suganis dies, not in glorious battle, but in a moment of political miscalculation, and with his death, diplomacy dies too. What follows is a masterclass in Astartes warfare. The Luna Wolves don't just attack Terra, they orchestrate a symphony of destruction that leaves the defenders' advanced technology looking like children's toys. These aren't the half-starved PDF forces most worlds can muster. Terra's military is professional, well-equipped, determined. It doesn't matter. Gavriel Loken leads the assault that breaks their final stronghold. He's the first to reach the throne room, the first to see this other emperor. And what he finds isn't a monster or a tyrant, just an old man, defeated and afraid, watching his world burn. Horus arrives and does what needs to be done. One swift blow. The force field around the throne shatters like glass. The Emperor of Terra dies, and with him dies any pretense that the Imperium's expansion is purely peaceful. But that's just the beginning, because while the Luna Wolves are busy conquering worlds, something else is happening. Something that will prove far more dangerous than any human empire. The Remembrancers arrive. Now you might think artists and poets are harmless. Malcador the Sigillite certainly did when he authorized their deployment to document the Great Crusade. What could go wrong with sending civilians to record the glory of imperial expansion? Everything, as it turns out. See, the Remembrancers aren't just observers. They're interpreters. They don't just record events, they give them meaning. They turn battles into legends, commanders into heroes, victories into myths. And some of the Astartes legions start to like that attention, start to crave it. The Emperor's children embrace the Remembrancers, seeing them as a way to showcase their perfection. The Thousand Sons see potential allies in their quest for knowledge. But the Luna Wolves, they're more cautious, more suspicious, except for a few. Meanwhile, Horus has his own problems. The conquest of Terra should have been straightforward, but there's a complication. A fortress in the mountains called the Whisperheads, where the last remnants of Terra's military have holed up. The Imperial army has been battering themselves against its walls for weeks with nothing to show for it but casualties. The army commanders are proud men, veterans of dozens of campaigns. They don't want to admit they need help from the Astartes. But the siege is becoming an embarrassment, a stain on the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet's record. Horus, master diplomat that he is, finds a solution that saves everyone's pride. He doesn't offer to take over the siege. Instead, he asks Gavriel Loken to volunteer for a reconnaissance mission. Just a few squads, nothing major. Certainly not a full assault that would show up the army's efforts. Of course, when those few squads happen to be Luna Wolves' Astartes, reconnaissance becomes conquest in a matter of hours. The fortress falls, the siege ends, and everyone can pretend it was a joint operation. But victory comes with a price, because inside the Whisperheads, something is wrong. The electronics are screaming with interference. Strange sounds echo through the corridors, and one of Loken's most trusted sergeants, Xavier Jubel, starts acting different. Jubel was a veteran, a man who'd fought beside Loken for decades, steady, reliable, everything you'd want in an Astartes sergeant. So when he starts muttering to himself, when his movements become jerky and unnatural, Loken notices. What happens next is something that shouldn't be possible, something that violates everything the Imperium claims to know about the nature of reality. Jubel transforms, not gradually, not through some disease or injury, but instantaneously. One moment he's a Luna Wolf, the next he's something else, something with too many teeth and claws where fingers should be, something that attacks his own battle brothers with inhuman strength and alien intelligence. Loken has to kill him, has to put down a man he trusted with his life. But even as Jubel dies, he speaks. Not words of pain or confusion, but something else. Something that suggests this transformation wasn't random, wasn't accidental. The stars are turning, Jubel whispers as he dies. The sky is falling. Later in private, Horus explains what Loken has witnessed. The warp, that parallel dimension through which the Imperium's ships travel, isn't empty. It's full of entities, intelligent beings that feed on emotion and chaos, beings that the Emperor has been secretly studying and fighting. Demons, Horus calls them, though he makes it clear that term is inadequate. These aren't the simple monsters of ancient mythology. They're something far more dangerous. They're strategists, manipulators, corruptors, and somehow they're starting to influence the Astartes. The revelation shakes Loken to his core. Everything he's believed about the imperial truth, about mankind's destiny among the stars, suddenly seems naive. If the warp contains hostile intelligences, if they can possess even genetically enhanced super soldiers, then what does that mean for the Great Crusade? Horus seems almost disappointed that he has to be the one to explain this. He mentions that the Emperor has been keeping these truths from even his closest advisors, making decisions about threats they don't even know exist. There's a note of resentment in his voice, a suggestion that perhaps the Emperor's secrecy isn't entirely justified. But the horrors aren't over, because as Loken investigates Jubel's transformation, he discovers something else, a secret society within the Luna Wolves themselves, battle brothers wearing silver medallions, meeting in hidden gatherings, swearing oaths that have nothing to do with the Emperor or the Imperium. The warrior lodges, they call themselves, brotherhoods within brotherhoods, loyal to ideals that aren't necessarily imperial ideals, and somehow Jubel was connected to them. Horus Aximand, one of the Marnival and Loken's closest friend, reveals that he's a member. He invites Loken to join, to learn the deeper truths that the lodges preserve, but Loken hesitates. His instincts, honed by decades of warfare, tell him something is wrong. The Marnival itself becomes a source of tension. This informal council of four captains has enormous influence over Horus, perhaps more than any official body. With Suganis dead, Loken takes his place, but the dynamic has changed. Ezekiel Abaddon, future despoiler of Cadia, pushes for more aggressive tactics. Horus Aximon brings whispers from the warrior lodges. Tarek Torgarden tries to maintain balance, but even he seems affected by the growing undercurrents of discontent. And through it all, Horus watches, listens, plans. His charisma isn't just natural talent, it's almost supernatural. He adapts his personality to whoever he's speaking with, becoming exactly what they need him to be. To the diplomats, he's reasonable and cultured. To the warriors, he's fierce and inspiring. To his sons, he's the perfect father figure. But Loken begins to see the cracks, moments when Horus's mask slips, when something harder and more calculating shows through. The War Master is playing a game that none of them fully understand, and the stakes are higher than anyone realizes. The Emperor's decision to keep the truth about the warp secret is starting to look less like wisdom and more like a fatal mistake. How can you fight an enemy you won't acknowledge exists? How can you protect your forces from corruption they don't know is possible? Horus understands this. He sees that the Imperium's greatest strength, its unity and certainty, is also its greatest weakness. A civilization built on lies, no matter how well-intentioned those lies might be, is inherently unstable. The Remembrancers continue their work, documenting victories and defeats, turning the Great Crusade into an epic poem, but they're also asking questions, hard questions about the cost of conquest, about the morality of forced compliance, about what happens to the cultures the Imperium destroys in its march toward unity. Some of the Astartes start listening to those questions, start wondering if there might be better ways to achieve their goals. The warrior lodges provide a forum for those discussions, a place where the rigid hierarchy of the legions can be temporarily set aside, as it all seems so reasonable, so logical. A few independent thinkers asking legitimate questions about the direction of the Great Crusade. What could be the harm in that? Everything, as it turns out, because in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, reasonable questions have a way of leading to unreasonable answers. And those silver medallions the lodge members wear, they're not just symbols of brotherhood. There's something else, something that resonates with forces beyond the material realm, something that makes their wearers more susceptible to whispers from the warp. The corruption is subtle at first, a suggestion here, a doubt there. Why should the Emperor make all the decisions? Why shouldn't the Primarchs who've conquered worlds and led armies have more say in humanity's future? Why should ancient traditions and arbitrary rules constrain the next step in human evolution? Reasonable questions, logical concerns, the kind of thoughts that any intelligent being might have when faced with an authoritarian system, no matter how benevolent that system claims to be. But in the warp, the entities that feed on chaos and discord hear every doubt, every moment of uncertainty, and they begin to work. Loken stands at the center of this growing storm, trying to understand what's happening to his legion, his friends, his father figure. He can see the changes, feel the tension building, but he doesn't yet understand what it means. The day Horus slew the Emperor of Terra was just the beginning. The real test, the real tragedy is still to come, when the War Master himself begins to listen to those reasonable questions, when the greatest military mind in the galaxy starts to wonder if perhaps the Emperor's vision for humanity is flawed, when doubt becomes ambition and ambition becomes betrayal. The pieces are all in place now. The secret societies, the hidden knowledge, the growing resentment, the supernatural corruption, all it needs is a catalyst, something to push the greatest of the Emperor's sons over the edge. That catalyst is coming, and when it arrives, the galaxy will burn. But that's a story for next time. For now, we're left with Gavriel Loken, standing in the ruins of a conquered world, holding the pieces of a puzzle he doesn't yet understand. A loyal son of the Emperor, watching his family tear itself apart from within. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there are no heroes, only victims and survivors. And sometimes, if you're very unlucky, you get to be both. The Horus Heresy has begun. The question isn't whether the Imperium will survive it. The question is what will be left when the fires finally die down. Thank you for joining me on Grimdark Tactics. If this deep dive into the opening of the Horus Heresy has left you hungry for more, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're just getting started on this journey into the heart of darkness, and trust me, it only gets more twisted from here. Next time, we'll explore how Horus's fall truly begins and discover the role that fatherly love and cosmic horror play in the galaxy's greatest tragedy. Until then, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But at least we can try to understand why. For the Emperor, for now,